Okay, so in this video, we're going to do a comparison between the Deathmatch and the Blackcliff polearm. Everyone should remember that these are kind of pre-meditative results or calculations, and they're not indicative of what exactly Xiao is going to be like when he comes out. So they could change his numbers, but assuming they're going to be similar, then these are kind of some conclusions or how we can look at both of these polearms in comparison. So the first thing we need to know is basically the differences between the two. So the substat for the deathmatch is crit rate, 36.8%, and then the Blackcliff gets a 55.1% crit damage buff. The passive of the deathmatch is a lot better. Basically, if there's more than two opponents, then you get a 32% attack increase, and yeah, it's basically there always, and it doesn't really time out. And if the number of opponents is less than 2, then you get a 48% attack increase. That's really good against bosses because there's usually just one person and you're utilizing the deathmatch to its fullest potential there. And you don't need to worry about it not activating or any situational kind of things. Base attack for the deathmatch is a lot lower than the base attack for the Blackcliff. The Blackcliff's passive is really good if you can activate it and utilize it to its fullest extent. So the Blackcliff gains for 30 seconds a 24% attack buff after defeating an opponent, and this should be max 3 stacks. So it adds up to 72% attack increase. So this is sort of just showing the calculation that I did in a spreadsheet. This is the attack formula. These are all of the inputs. And then basically I do a crit damage calculation also, which is the non-crit damage multiplied by 1 plus the crit damage, I think. Something like that. And then the average damage is a weighted average between the non-crit and the crit based off of the crit rate and the non-crit rate. So we consider these skills on Xiao, and we calculated it for his normal attack, elemental skill, elemental burst. So this slide shows the assumptions that we made for the deathmatch and basically the differences in the formulas as I did the calculations in the spreadsheet. So the skill multiplier will change for each of these. We're assuming level 6 skills, and basically for the elemental burst, we're considering a plunge attack because that's probably what you're going to be doing a lot of the time with him. For 0, 1, 2 Blackcliff stacks, these numbers aren't really going to change. Basically, when I did the max stack or 3 stacks calculation for the Blackcliff, I assumed that we can consider the deathmatch at its fullest potential. So with one or less than two enemies on the field. And so that's why there is a increase from the attack from 36% to 48% on the max stacks. The only other thing to note here is that for the elemental burst, he gets like a kind of a damage bonus, and this is supposed to be, according to someone in the comments of my last video, inside the elemental bonus section of the formula. So I've got that shown here. For the Blackcliff, everything is very similar. The attack percent increase is going to depend on which stack we're on. The skill multipliers are all the same. The crit damage increase is always going to be the same. The elemental bonus increase or the damage increase from the elemental burst should be the same. At max stacks, it stops at 72%. So these are the results from this kind of intermediate calculation. In this case, I'd like to point out that deathmatch always came out on top, and we're going to talk about why exactly that is. So the artifact main stat combination that we used for these calculations, where we considered all of the different skills, was a crit damage, elemental bonus, and attack percent. And if we look down here, what we can see is that the deathmatch had basically an 81% crit rate and a 162% crit damage. This is a lot closer to the golden ratio, or basically the ratio for the maximum damage output for almost any weapon. It ranges for each weapons, but this is a lot closer to that value for the deathmatch than it is for the Blackcliff. For the Blackcliff, we can see we're not even at 50% crit rate, although we do have a lot of crit damage. The only thing we can see from this is that at full stacks, the Blackcliff is actually getting very close to the Deathmatch. So when we graph this data, we can see a little bit more about what exactly this means. The first two here are the non-critical hit values for the normal attack, where gray or black is for the Blackcliff and red is for the Deathmatch. So you can see at 0 stacks, the Deathmatch is outperforming it, but if there's a crit, then the Blackcliff will actually do more damage. As we add more stacks, definitely at 2 stacks, we can see that the non-crit hit of the Blackcliff and the crit hit of the Blackcliff are both higher than the Deathmatch. When we do the weighted average calculation for the Deathmatch and the Blackcliff, then the Deathmatch will come out higher because it's getting more crits, and so we're considering this value a lot more. We can see that at 3 stacks, due to the damage buff, they come out neck to neck, so they're very, very close. And for this amount of damage, it's almost negligible, so it doesn't really matter which one you use. For the elemental skill and the burst graphs, we can see the exact same trend, and that's because the only difference between the two is the skill multiplier, and then basically the elemental bonus for the burst, which brings these a little bit closer, but it's almost negligible in this case. In this section, we're going to consider all of the different artifact main stat combinations, and we're going to have assumed substats of 20% crit rate and 50% crit damage. So the way to read this is that each combination is read as a line. So first we're considering attack, attack, attack percents, crit rate, elemental bonus, attack, and then etc., etc. So we're considering 6 cases for everything, and each of these cases, we're considering a 5-star level 20 main stat artifact. So it's fully powered up, and basically these are the maximum values that I showed here. Up here we've got recommended artifact sets, so we're not talking about that too much, but I would recommend the Verdus Venerer and a 2-set Gladiator for either of these weapons, because basically these effects will apply all the time and help for most of the skills. There's none of the skills it's basically not going to work. Like for example, a physical damage bonus won't work during the ult. So these are the results from the calculations. Here you can actually see, you can pause the video if you want, and you can see the exact attack, crit rate, crit damage. I didn't include the elemental bonus, but I can do that in the future. But basically we can see how these change. So for example, the Blackcliff is on the right. So this value is higher because the base attack of the Blackcliff is higher, and we're considering 3 attack artifacts right at the beginning. So you can see kind of how that affects that. But then in this case, with this setup, the deathmatch is going to have a much higher crit rate. So we can see in some of these cases, the crit rate for the deathmatch actually goes over 100%, and that's pretty bad. So you're going to want to avoid those cases because that's a waste of a stat. You can also see kind of here highlighted in darker and lighter green, the most ideal or the kind of highest values or combinations of artifacts for each of these. So when I graph this data, here you can kind of see the different artifact combinations, and the conclusion we can make is that the Blackcliff for a non-crit hit will usually put up higher numbers due to the larger base attack. So we're also considering these numbers for both of them at their maximum potential. So the Deathmatch buff is 48% and the Blackcliff buff is 72%. If the Blackcliff was at 0 stacks, then the deathmatch would probably be above in a lot of these cases. So here we can see when there's a crit, the Blackcliff will basically always put up a much higher number. Even at 0 stacks, the Blackcliff should actually be putting out higher critical values. And this is because there's a larger base attack on the Blackcliff, and it has its very high extra crit damage. So when we do a weighted average of both, we get some pretty interesting results. The main takeaway here is that the deathmatch will actually catch up and outpace pace or do more damage than the Blackcliff in two cases here, when there's a crit damage artifact or main stat on both of them, but the Blackcliff will do the maximum amount of damage. So you can look through these and kind of see how they fare up and look at those charts to see some more exact numbers. The Deathmatch is able to catch up because of the larger crit rate buff. The Deathmatch is getting a lot more crit hits than the Blackcliff is. So in conclusion, I would recommend the Deathmatch for consistency. It'll work in basically every situation, and you don't need to rely on getting those kills and kind of getting that momentum in order to create your damage output. The Blackcliff will create the largest numbers on the screen. So given the situation, if you're at your fullest potential and you have your correct artifacts sets, then the Blackcliff is going to probably print out the largest number on the screen. But that's not going to be against any boss. So the Blackcliff is better than the Deathmatch for mobs where there's lots of weak enemies. So potentially if you can even get kills in Spiral fast enough, then the Blackcliff will probably be better. But the Deathmatch is much, much better than the Blackcliff for bosses because it's kind of at its full potential here, and the Blackcliff would be at 0 stacks always. The Deathmatch is a pay-to-win weapon. You can only get it from the Battle Pass, and the Blackcliff is free to play, assuming you're doing your summons and you're saving up all of your masterful star glitter. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe for more videos like this. In the next video, we're going to be looking at the Lithic Spear and comparing it to the Blackcliff, which is going to be pretty interesting because the Lithic Spear is something that's not out yet, but it's probably going to come out in 1.3, and I think it's actually going to be one of the three best 4-star free-to-play spears. Or maybe not free-to-play, it might not be that, we're not sure. But yeah, I hope you liked the video and see you next time.